When Thomas Jefferson first ran for president, journalists were there to cover the campaign. The drama and conflict of a political contest offered the press endless possibilities for stories. And for candidates, media became an important way to make their views known to the public and to communicate with large numbers of potential voters.
Vote for George O'Brien, get for Charlie of the MTA.
In time, political campaigns began to stage events to attract the attention of news reporters as part of their overall strategy.
This is Walter Cronkite back in Studio A, our control point.
As television became the primary source of campaign news, there were profound changes in the political scene.
For a better way, Bill McKay.
Bottom line is this, I like what you stand for. You got balls, otherwise I wouldn't take you on. All right, so we take my crew, we get you doing your thing, and that's it. Thanks, honey. Huh? You just get on with the people. Let me worry about the cameras.
The increasing importance of media has given rise to a whole new category of political media consultants.
Okay, now for starters, we gotta cut your hair and 86 the sideburns. All right, let's go.
These consultants shape the image of candidates and attempt to control how they are perceived by the public. They set campaign agenda and determine strategy.
Stay focused. Talk about things that matter to people. It's the economy, stupid.
Some political consultants are hired guns selling their services to the highest bidder, regardless of the political convictions they hold personally. Others work for the candidate of the party they believe to have the best stand on the issues.
It's the record, it's the agenda, it's the qualifications.
A political consultant's responsibilities include everything from polling and creating ads to designing special events that will attract media attention.
Yes, it's a very important voice, and it should be heard. Come on, America!
A political consultant's job is to help advise a candidate on how to craft a winning message and a winning strategy, what it is that the candidate says or believes, how can that best be put, and when should it best be put in a way to win elections. I mean, the object is to portray the candidate as he or she really is on their best day.
That wasn't a
Okay,
sight.
anything else?
Oh, yeah, one more thing, Jack. This wire photo.
So what's the matter with him?
Suit bag.
I'm carrying the suit bag. That isn't real enough for you?
With all due respect, Jack, carrying your own bag is the wrong symbol at the wrong time. It says that you either can't or won't delegate. It says Jimmy Carter.
Oh, that's slow.
I really do think that the constant use of the word image brings up this view that what a candidate says and does in a campaign is essentially contrived, that we can somehow fake the voters. All we got to do is figure out the little magic formula. We'll fool them long enough to get their vote, and then reality will set in. And I don't believe that. I mean, I don't believe that, particularly in a high visibility campaign like for governor or senator or congressman or president, that it really is possible to fake people out.
47% of the primary field.
Yeah, but if you look at the projection on the printout, it adds up to 32% in the election.
So
So if those figures hold until November, it'll be Jarman 68, McKay 32.
The public use of polls involves an attempt to sort of create a bandwagon effect, and an attempt to say either we're closing the gap with our opponent or we've moved dramatically ahead of our opponent, so don't bother voting for our opponent, contributing to our opponent, supporting our opponent because he or she is going to lose.
Don't take my word for it. Look at every poll that you see.
There's going to be a poll that's going to come out, which we did jointly. It's going to show extraordinary changes on the favorabilities.
Private uses of polls by campaigns help them refine the message of the competing things that we could talk about, which is the more powerful and which is the more powerful with certain groups. And there may be several different ways that we can talk about a particular issue. What's the more powerful way to talk about an issue?
New Hampshire is on the move. New Hampshire.
Choose the one you like the most.
Simply isn't working.
There's no battle for Jack Tanner's soul. His passions are real. They're palpable.
Well, melts in your mouth, but is it gonna stick to our ribs?
After campaign events such as debates or news conferences, members of a candidate's staff, so-called spin doctors, often circulate among the news media to try to put a favorable spin on their candidate's performance.
Another good night for Bill Clinton. 3 debates, 3 wins. Bush was on the defensive all night long. I think he was...
You know, look, there have always been spin doctors. I mean, the media have always asked candidates and campaigns to give their opinions on how they think things are going. And I don't care whether it's the 1800 presidential election or the 1996 presidential election, there have been spin doctors involved.
Finally, I want to thank the members of my brilliant, aggressive, unconventional, but always winning campaign staff.
Who is really in charge of the direction of a political campaign? The candidate or the political consultants?
You very rarely run into candidates who win who are not involved in crafting their own strategies. Because again, a campaign strategy is at its essence an expression of who the candidate is on his or her best day.
If you will be my voice tomorrow, I'll be yours for 4 years.
I thought of that, didn't I? I'll take credit for it.
I officially announce my candidacy.
To announce that I am a candidate.
I declare my candidacy.
To seek the nomination.
From my party's nomination.
For President of the United States.
Of the United States of America.
In spite of the work of spin doctors and media consultants, reporters are constantly on the lookout for flaws, weaknesses, blunders, and vulnerabilities in candidates.
I'm getting sick and tired. I am every single night hearing one of these carping little liberal Democrats jumping all over my you-know-what.
Statistics show that negative stories about candidates outnumber positive stories by 2 to 1.
Now, Governor Clinton has a character problem. But I take it that your line of counterattack.
Critics say that this negative reporting tends to create skepticism, cynicism, and apathy among voters. Both critics and journalists have strong views on the role of the press in presidential campaigns.
The role of the press is to take that complex accumulation of information that is the biography and the issue positions of candidates and help the American people make sense of them.
Well, I think the primary role is public information. You know, in a modern society, particularly about national government, state government, that's a very distant government from our daily lives. And for access to that and to information about international affairs, we really don't have any choice but to rely on the media. And therefore, I think the way that the media do the job of reporting on public affairs, I think, is important to the functioning of democracy.
We have to make an effort to reach the public, and we have to do it in a commercial medium that is supported by advertising for the most part. Most newspapers and most television stations are profit-making enterprises, or at least that's what their owners hope. So we have to get their interest, and we have to do it in such a way that we can, I hope, let them learn something. It's not easy.
Of course, the hardest job for reporters, especially in a campaign, it isn't in choosing what we do report. It's in choosing what we leave out. Those issues we tend to ignore, those issues that we don't count on as important. And what we are denying the American people is as important as what we do choose to tell them every night.
I think there's a tired old Republican Party that's run out of energy, ideas, direction, and compassion, and they ought to be run out of town.
I'm not running for the presidency of Washington, D.C.
I'm an outsider. I'm going to get my message to the voters. There isn't anybody in this room who wouldn't do anything for your children.
Keeps telling us that everything is going to hell.
Sometimes the only bridge we the people can win.
To be a broadly based party.
And it's the United States of America.
There you go again.
This average soundbite in campaigns now is down to 7 seconds. And a lot of people may think in watching a presidential campaign that they're listening primarily to the candidates when they follow the news. But in fact, the journalists who cover the candidates now speak about 6 minutes for every minute that the candidate speaks.
So as the candidates leave Iowa and head to New Hampshire, the very real possibility exists that a Democratic frontrunner won't emerge until
Republicans raised $3 million here at this dinner. That's 3 times what Michael Dukakis and Lloyd Bentsen.
I think journalists have an obligation, one that in the main they're failing to follow, and that's to give voice to what the candidates are saying about their own candidacies.
Did Bill Clinton go to Moscow? Are 2 pages missing from his passport? Did he organize anti-war rallies while he was in Moscow? Did he graduate from Oxford?
Yes, he went to Moscow. He was to brag about it in speeches when he ran for office.
Journalists contend that they often have to deal with manipulation of facts by media advisors and spin doctors.
We have become very sensitive to efforts to manipulate us, to stampede us into doing a story that would be destructive of another candidate. And this is a technique that the political consultants have always used, but I suppose especially in the last 10 years since the Gary Hart fiasco. And what you do is you follow the principles of good investigative reporting. The first thing you do is investigate your sources to find out what their motives are and how good the information is. And then you use some judgment. Is this relevant?
Reporters must deal with constant photo opportunities and staged events presented by campaign media experts. They must decide if these events are newsworthy or not.
I think you got to use news judgment in determining what you're going to cover in the course of a candidate's day and evening. There are some things that are obviously contrived stunts that have no meaning, no relevance to the campaign.
Are political conventions really stunts?
Imagery and sending out just the right kind of television good vibration. Lisa?
How much coverage do they deserve?
The networks are cutting back on their coverage. I think they would cover these events if they were really political events, but now they're really one long protracted political speech. And if they become that, and there is nothing really done at these conventions other than that, let them run on C-SPAN, let them run on MSNBC or CNN, someplace where the junkies like us will watch it.
I think the 1996 national conventions are a pretty instructive case, I think, about the relationship between the press and the politician. We had some journalists essentially stalk out of San Diego saying there's no news here. I think that's a narrow definition of what the news is. I think it's a legitimate news event. When our parties hold their national conventions, they only do it every 4 years. And the idea that somehow journalists are sacrificing something by paying attention to what the parties are doing in terms of their platforms, their nominations, their acceptance speeches once every 4 years seems to me to misunderstand essentially what politics in the news is about. It's not simply about meeting journalists' needs for big stories, the sensational story. Sometimes it's about communicating basic events and developments, and party conventions are in that category.
You have to call a staged event what it is. You have to point out, for example, that a national political convention, which is scripted down to the last second over a period of 3.5 or 4 days, is precisely that, a paid political commercial for the candidate for president and vice president.
To me, I think conventions are still important, and maybe because I like to go to them, but in fact, that's one time when you get to look at the party and you get to look at the major figures in the party, and you get to sort of get give the American public a view of the two main parties which still play a major role in our national politics.
Just take one step at a time. We feel good about it.
Bob Dole and Bill Clinton started out closely matched last summer in a theoretical race for president.
In modern presidential campaigns, the results of polls conducted by various organizations are announced almost daily, and reporters must decide how much weight to give these often conflicting polls.
This guy is an idiot. In tracking polls, we're going up in every one.
In the old days, you couldn't really figure out who was going to win the election till the election. And so there's a good thing and a bad thing about polls. I mean, one thing, the good part of it is they really do give us a lot of information about what the electorate is thinking, what they think the issues are, and where the electorate stands. I mean, the bad thing is to let it drive the coverage too much.
One thing that we know about news is that news has to be new. It has to be something different about today as compared with yesterday. So, what was the front page yesterday, you can't simply replay it again today. And so the journalist, having covered an issue, begins then to look to something else. What do they look to? They look to the changing aspect of the campaign, which is the horse race and the strategy. Unfortunately, it's the case today that most of our coverage, because of that, is about the horse race.
The convention poll bounce, a 7-point increase for the team of Bush and Quayle since a similar poll taken just a week ago.
Horse race coverage in reporting a campaign is generally the kind of daily reporting that says X stumbled yesterday, which gives Y a big advantage, and Z is trailing badly in the polls because nobody's paying any attention to his message. This sort of thing, which tells you on a day-to-day basis who's up, who's down, who's in, who's out, is generally called horse race coverage of campaigns. Critics say that it does not explore the issues in campaigns.
It's this fascination with the process of a campaign as opposed to the substance of the campaign that I find really troubling. And I think there is a bias on the part of the media towards this game schema. They want to be participants in the process rather than neutral observers of the process. They want to make judgments about how the campaign is going rather than to report what it is that the candidates are saying.
I would say he's not only in the driver's seat, but he's got the pedal to the metal, and the Republicans are jumping out of the way like scared pedestrians.
Well, the horse race reporting is much maligned, in my opinion. There are times in the course of a campaign when the horse race becomes very, very important and deserves to be reported.
Year after year, the press has been criticized for just doing the horse race in a presidential campaign. Who's ahead? What's the strategy? A presidential campaign is a horse race. Of course we tell the voters who's ahead or who seems to be gaining with what voter groups. Some of us have just quit apologizing for it.
Tonight, a lot of people will say the election is over.
May God bless you and may God bless America. Thank you very much.
Thank you. God bless you. And good night.
If you're part of the Republicans or Democrats, you're automatically accepted as mainstream. If you're not, you're marginalized to some extent.
Outside the security of the two-party system, campaign media is a whole different ballgame. Third-party candidates often don't have the financing to purchase paid advertising or the credibility to gain the attention of mass media.
In order to gain that recognition, you have got to get your message out to the public. Now, the means of doing that are either through paid media, advertisements, or free or earned media, which are news reports or appearances on radio, television, and newspaper reports.
How do you feel today? Great.
Ross Perot ran for president in 1992 as an independent, and in 1996 under the banner of the Reform Party.
I will dedicate myself as the servant of the American people to solving these problems. I don't belong to anybody but you.
Although Perot couldn't plead poverty, he chose to seek new and unusual ways to reach voters.
Born on a blistering hot day in 1930.
His cutting-edge media strategies were so effective, they influenced the campaigns of the mainstream parties.
If you're that serious, you, the people, are that serious, you register me in 50 states. And if you're not willing to organize and do that, then this is all just talk. Stay with me, Larry. I'm saying to the ordinary folks, and I don't.
There's no question that Ross Perot has revolutionized not only candidates' approaches to the media, but the media's approach to candidates. The appearance by Ross Perot on the Larry King talk show in February of 1992, where he said, well, if the folks put me in the ballot, I will run, I think brought a whole new level of attention to talk shows. But if you can go in and sit down and have a discussion with that talk show host, you become personalized to the audience who like that talk show host. So it's a wonderful opportunity to communicate with them. But essentially what Ross was doing was trying to find ways to force the candidates to speak to the public. Instead of the commercial and the paid consultants and the pollsters who did all the focus groups giving a message to the public, let the candidates speak to them and express their values.
If I could just wish for one great thing for this country, it would be to have a strong family unit in every home.
In 1996, much of that television had evolved into the Ricky Lake type of sensationalism interviews and was no longer compatible with getting the campaign's message out to the public. So we went back to the traditional, Ross Perot traditional, long format infomercial.
Make your vote count with Ross Perot.
As you go into the voting booths tomorrow, you and millions of other voters will be making the decision to either hire or fire the President of the United States.
Ross believes that you can't communicate a significant amount of information to the public for them to make an informed decision in 30 seconds or 60 seconds.
By a leader whose proven actions speak louder than words.
We have a moral obligation.
You can manipulate them with emotions or anger or fear, but you can't really inform them in that amount of time. You need some time to do that. You need 30 minutes. So we focused our campaign in 1996 on the 30-minute televised programs in prime time.
Ross Perot personifies how one person can make a difference in the lives of others.
An infomercial is an opportunity for a person to communicate directly to the public in an unfiltered way and provide them with information from a trusted and reliable source. They see the emotion, the passion or lack of passion of a person associated with an idea or an issue or a principle.
The standard of living is down for 4 out of 5 working Americans. Your neighborhoods are filled with crime and your children carry guns to school. Meantime, the Democrats and Republicans are selling out American workers and families to big campaign contributions and foreign interests. I will not allow the futures of our...
If you can give an uninterrupted, no commercial break speech to the public, you can get your message out.
How can we return our country to the people? Tonight, I call on the 6 million small business owners and the 80 million people who work for them to vote Perot.
The tactics of an election evolve around the newest technologies. I remember the 1988 campaign, anybody carrying a cellular phone was essentially carrying a car battery around with them. In the 1992 campaign, the only people who knew about the World Wide Web were scientists who used it for research. In the year 1996, the web was available where people had home pages and could put up large documents, and it was easier for the public, who more of whom had computers, to get the background information on the candidates and the in-depth information on the speeches. So you had the use of digital pages, cellular telephones, the internet, which included both rapid response devices such as email, where you can contact a large number of people almost instantly with a consistent message that they could then turn around and get to their local media, so that you had a consistency of a message all across the country. You can make very inexpensive videos today and deliver them to neighborhoods by hand. You can mass mail videos. We have no idea what the technology of the year 2000 campaign will be. We just know it'll be able to communicate with more people quicker and more effectively than what we have been able to in the past.
Is somebody torpedoing your campaign?
And according to a new poll, Bob Dole is down 21 points.
Washington's going to be changed. We're going to change
No. But I think the big winner of the week is not Bill Clinton. The big winner of the week is Al Gore.
Punch, please, on the A page.
Promising to deliver on their so-called contract with America.
With so much information bombarding voters during an election campaign, how can a discerning voter make an intelligent choice?
One thing that I have learned in 25 years of specializing in covering politics has been to respect the intelligence of the American voters. I think the more information that we can put out that is useful, the better it is for this exercise in democracy. But I don't worry about the American people having too much information. I'd be more concerned if they didn't have enough.
The best way for a voter to learn about politics is to pay careful attention to candidate debates, whether at the state, local, or national level, to read a number of major newspapers to get ideological balance, and to pay attention to C-SPAN and the evening news. Those who don't have enough time to do all of that should at least be reading one newspaper, paying attention to one good national and local newscast, and watching the presidential and national debates.
People need to do other things, and here I shouldn't say this because it's my business, but people should do other things than simply watch TV. I think the people who are interested should read. It
seems to me that our job is to give them the facts to sort out, to let them know what the situation is with this candidate, what the candidate stands for, what the candidate's history has been. And if they want to take advantage of the information that's out there, and it's always available somewhere in the popular press, then they can. Many of them will not. But that, I think, is something that's beyond our control.
The real key here is to make the marketplace of ideas, the communication during the campaign, as robust as possible, to bring as much information as possible. Let it be a little bit noisy. And the way that all of us work, we can work our way through that.
Voters have to remember to go to many, many different sources to get the view of their president or of the presidential candidates. And the more diverse view you get, the better understanding the voter will have when it comes to time to step into that voting booth and to cast a vote.